Hello, Clinic Review family. It's Dr. Sharon with Clinic Reviews, the very best NCLEX review in the business, in my opinion. Go to clinicreviews.com to sign up for an online on-demand review. And if you're interested in paying for something that I do, you can sign up for my next gen small group tutoring. And you can see those that are ready to take there. It does cost money to do that. Thank you so much to all of our channel members. You can choose from between 2 different levels at this time. I may have 3 in the future. I'm working on that right now. And go ahead and hit like and subscribe to our channel. And I'll thank you for that very much. So let's talk about ethics. This is really imperative for you to know for NCLEX. And I'm going to talk about it at the fundamental level. Can you get more complicated questions than this? You can. But as I've said in some previous videos that I've done this month, I'm really focusing on fundamentals because you have to know your fundamentals or you cannot pass NCLEX. So let's go ahead and just talk about a couple of principles first. Okay, so first of all, the American Nurses Association Code of Ethics is what guides our practice from an ethical perspective. If you are educated outside the country, this is something that you really need to be familiar with, because although the Code of Ethics won't always tell you the right answer, the Code of Ethics will help rule out wrong answers. So I'll say that again. The Code of Ethics is not always going to give you the right answer, but it will help you rule out wrong answers, because there will never be an answer on the NCLEX that's right, that violates the Code of Ethics. So one of the ways that I do questions is I rule out wrong answers and I say, well, what's left? So you have to know what is considered unethical from an American nursing perspective before you can rule out wrong answers. And the way things are worded, sometimes they sound right until you realize they actually violate the Code of Ethics. So there's 9 provisions in the Code of Ethics. So you don't need to memorize the words in the Code of Ethics, but you need to know what it's saying. Okay, provision 1, the nurse in all professional relationships practices with compassion and respect for the inherent dignity, worth, and uniqueness of every individual, unrestricted by considerations of social or economic status, personal attributes, or the nature of health problems. Now, that's not saying the hospitals are guided by that. That's saying we do that. So when you never choose to not care for a person because of their socioeconomic status, personal attributes, uniqueness of them, or whatever. Every person deserves our compassion, our respect. They have dignity, every single person, no matter what personal feelings you may have. So if a prisoner comes, we have a lot of hospitals service prisoners, and if they have a prison in their area, and they'll come with prison guards. They'll be guarded while they're in the room. And it doesn't matter what they've done. According to our Code of Ethics, we're obligated to care for them. I remember when the Boston Marathon bomber was caught, I think he was caught either the day of or the next day after the Boston Marathon bombing, where he killed like people and kids, and it was horrible. And they took him to the hospital because he was injured. And I remember thinking, those nurses have to care for this guy no matter what. They cannot refuse him. If they're going to follow the ANA Code of Ethics, they cannot refuse to care for him. Provision 2, the nurse's primary commitment is to the patient, whether an individual, family group, or community. Now, that doesn't mean the family group or community is always your patient, but you have to, in this setting, you say, who's my patient? Like in maternity, it's the mother and the baby. In med-surg, it's the patient, the one individual patient. In community setting, it's the community, right? So you have to identify who it is. So it's not, the family is not always your patient. If you're an adult med-surg, the patient is the patient. Their family's not your patient, which means your primary commitment is to the patient, which is why, let's say you're taking care of someone who's been identified, or you think they're probably brain dead, and you think they'd be good for organ donation. If you're the bedside nurse, you cannot ask the family to make that patient an organ donor, because the patient is your primary responsibility, not all the people who could get their organs. That's considered unethical for you to ask your patient's family to make that patient an organ donor and to let them die so that they can donate their organs, let their heart stop so they can donate the organs. Because your primary responsibility is to the patient. Provision 3, the nurse promotes, advocates for, and strives to protect the health, safety, and rights of the patient. The reason we advocate for our patients is to protect their rights. And you have to have that in your head. Y'all, I take that very, very seriously. Patients have the right to make their own decisions. They have the right to quality care. They have the right to be treated with respect. And I advocate for them to make sure their rights are maintained. Now, that is a distinctly Western value, and even more so an American value. People having the right to things is a distinctly American value. And so if you were educated outside the US or you grew up outside the US and you say autonomy, I don't think autonomy is as important as you do, Dr. Sharon. I say that's fine. You don't have to. But for the NCLEX, you sure have to think autonomy is important because they have rights. Okay. And you got to make sure you understand that. Provision 4, the nurse is responsible and accountable for their individual nursing practice and determines the appropriate delegation of tasks consistent with the nurse's obligation to provide optimum patient care. Now, this one, don't use this to decide you're not going to delegate feeding a patient to the nursing assistant, okay? This isn't what guides that. What this is really saying is you're responsible for your own nursing care. I don't think this is going to be tested in the way that's closer to just delegation. Do you know what you're legally allowed to delegate to the nursing assistant? Do you know what you're legally allowed to delegate to the LPN, which is a legal question, not an ethical question. So they don't really test this on the NCLEX. What they're saying is, as a nurse, if you delegate something to someone else and they do it wrong, you're still responsible for it because you're responsible for your own practice and you're responsible for what you delegate. So that's really what it's saying. You're responsible for your own practice. That's not really going to be tested on the NCLEX so much. Provision 5, the nurse owes the same duties to self as to others, including responsibility to preserve integrity and safety, to maintain competence, and to continue personal and professional growth. Probably not going to be tested on the NCLEX so much. If it is, it's going to be a real vague question about how you have to continue to grow professionally. But that's not really, I wouldn't say provision 4 and 5 ethically, from an ethical perspective, are not really going to be tested. Now, 4 could be tested from a legal standpoint in that they want to know if you know what you can delegate. And I have all those SATA videos on delegation. Watch those SATA videos on delegation. Okay. We're not going to talk about delegation in this one. Provision 6, the nurse participates in establishing, maintaining, and improving healthcare environments and conditions of employment conducive to the provision of quality healthcare and consistent with the values of the profession through individual and collective actions. This is just saying you should be a part of the profession, okay, and helping it grow and become better. That's all it's saying. You're responsible as a part of the profession to help improve the profession. Don't hold it back. You're not supposed to be arguing and saying, I don't want to be a part of that research study. Ethically, they're saying, not legally, this is not legal. You're not going to be arrested. You're not going to lose your license if you don't want to participate in a research study. That's not what it's saying. It's saying ethically, you should be a part of advancing the profession. Provision 7, the nurse participates in the advancement of the profession through contributions to practice education. Okay, that's another one, advancement of the profession. It's an ethical thing, not legal. Remember, this is not a legal document. This document, however, could be brought into court if they question the ethical decision that you make. And they could say, why did you make that decision? You say, well, here's why I make it. And they say, well, that violated the ANA Code of Ethics. That doesn't mean you're legally responsible, but they would say it still was the wrong thing to do. You may not be legally liable, but you're ethically liable. And again, that's not going to be tested on the NCLEX. Provision 8, the nurse collaborates with other health professions and the public in promoting community, national, international efforts to meet health needs. Again, if it's tested on the NCLEX, it's a big general question about how we're responsible to engage with our profession to promote the health of our community. And then provision 9, the profession of nursing, as represented by associations and their members, is responsible for articulating nursing values, for maintaining the integrity of the profession and its practice, and for shaping social policy. So that's more of a collective ethical value. That's not an individual ethical value. That's saying, different organizations are responsible to promote the health and values and so forth. So the key ones here really, 1, 2, and 3, you will be tested on. If you get an ethics question, you're going to be tested. It's going to cover one of those. And make sure you never pick an answer that violates any of these. Okay? You never want to violate these. And then 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 are going to be probably, if you get one, it's going to be a bigger idea question about how you have responsibilities to the profession to promote it and so forth. Okay. So 1, 2, and 3 are the key ones. Now, the other thing I want to talk about as it relates to ethics are ethical norms. They may or may not use the word norms, but if you're talking to someone who knows their ethics, they could use the word. The word norm means a value. These are values. And the thought is that ethical norms are constant across all cultures. All cultures have the same values, but they value them in a different hierarchy. So all cultures would value, for example, autonomy, the right to self-determination. I have the right to make my decisions about myself. All cultures would value that to some degree, but some cultures would value it less than others. So the opposite of autonomy is paternalism. Paternalism is me deciding what's best for you and me making sure what's done is best for you, and you really don't have the right to make that decision. Autonomy and paternalism kind of fight against each other. Now, sometimes the decision the individual wants to make is the same decision that the person in authority wants to make. And so there's no fight there. But when the person wants to make a different decision than the person in authority wants them to make, then that's a big fight. And in the United States, we value autonomy much more than we value paternalism. Now, you might not believe that with some of the things that are going on lately related to COVID and so forth, right? COVID was a crackdown on paternalism. That's what COVID was, a paternalistic crackdown. And that's why so many people didn't like it. However, if you grew up in a culture where paternalism was valued, you didn't mind that. You didn't mind the COVID restrictions. You said, hey, the government does what's best for us. We're gonna comply with what the government tells us to do because they do what's best for us. Or some people say, well, the doctor knows what's best. I'll do whatever the doctor says. See, that's very paternalistic. Instead of saying, well, here's all your options. Now you decide. And there's some patients who say, I don't want to decide. You tell me what you think I should do. They're asking you to be very paternalistic on their behalf. Okay, so autonomy is highly valued in the United States. There are times when paternalism rules. Now, when does paternalism rule? Where COVID is a good example of that. COVID was a paternalistic crackdown because it was believed it was in the best interest of the public. So paternalism is valued and legally allowable when the public interest demands paternalism for the government, so to speak, to crack down. Now, veracity is highly valued. That's truth-telling, fidelity, keeping a promise, privacy. We highly value that in the United States. There's a lot of countries that's not nearly as highly valued, but it's highly valued here. That's why HIPAA is a law. Justice, which is fairness, fair distribution, equality. In the United States, we say fair is equal. That's kind of the big idea. Beneficence, doing good for another, and non-maleficence, not doing harm. So these are ways that you can rule out wrong answers. You don't want to pick an answer where you're lying to someone. You don't want to pick an answer where you're violating their privacy. You don't want to pick an answer where you're not keeping a promise. You don't want to pick an answer where you're harming someone, right? So those can help you pick answers. And if they say, which of the following actions is an example of autonomy? You say, well, I'm looking for an answer that shows the patient has self-determination. If they say, which answer shows veracity? Well, I'm looking for the answer where they're telling the truth. Okay, so those are just principles. All right, let's do some questions. Which situation is an example of when the nurse's obligation may have to override the client's autonomy? A client with tuberculosis refuses treatment. A client refuses food during their religious fasting period. A Jehovah's Witness client refuses a blood transfusion, or a client requests to meet a chaplain. All right, when do we override a client's autonomy? I told you that in the last slide. We override a client's autonomy when it's in the public health interest. So which one of these is there a public health interest? A client with tuberculosis refuses treatment. Is there a public health interest there? Yes, because tuberculosis is highly infectious and they could go out and infect everybody. That's a problem. There's a public interest to A. B, client refuses food during the religious fasting period. Is that a public health interest? No. Could it harm the patient? It could, but it's not a public health interest, and they're allowed to do that if they want to. C, a Jehovah's Witness client refuses a blood transfusion. Is there a public health interest there? No. Could it hurt the patient? It could, but it's not going to hurt anybody else other than the patient. A client requests to meet a chaplain. Is there a public health interest there? No. Could it hurt the patient? No. So I'm definitely crossing off D. But B and C are going to hurt the patient, only they're not going to hurt anybody in the public, whereas A can hurt the public interest. So that's when a nurse's obligation may override a client's autonomy. The nurse is caring for a famous personality in the last stage of cancer. The nursing unit receives a phone call from a news reporter wanting to know the client's condition, which is the best action by the nurse. Refrain from disclosing any information about the client. Provide details of the client's health care provider. Ask the charge nurse to attend the call. Inform them the client is receiving palliative care. Okay, the nurse is caring for a famous personality in the last stage of cancer. The nursing unit receives a phone call from a news reporter, not a family or anything like that. A news reporter wanting to know the client's condition, which is the best action by the nurse. So we value privacy. We value truth telling. We value keeping a promise, right? These are things we value. So which answer is consistent with that? Refrain from disclosing any information about the client. Well, that maintains their privacy. So I like that answer. Provide details of the client's healthcare provider. Well, you might go, why can't I tell them who the doctor is? Because that still violates their privacy. You're not allowed to do that. Ask the charge nurse to attend the call. You could do that, but that's not saying that's not identifying that there's a problem with this request. And the NCLEX wants to know what you would do, not how you would pass it off to somebody else. So C is passing it off to somebody else. And that's never the right answer. Mark Clement calls that the chicken answer. Okay. Never pass the buck. You don't pass the buck. Okay. And that's what C is. It's passing the buck. So we're not going to do that. Inform them the client is receiving palliative care. That's violating privacy. So B and D violates privacy. C passes the buck. A is the only one that maintains the client privacy. So that's what we have to pick. Why is it important for the nurse to advocate for the client? Okay, so why do we advocate? To protect quality of care of the healthcare facility. Project. I think it means protect. I think it's supposed to be to protect quality care of the healthcare facility. Well, maybe, but there's nowhere where I'm ethically bound to protect quality care of the healthcare facility. I want to protect quality care for the client, but I'm not doing it for the healthcare facility because my primary obligation is to the patient, not to the healthcare facility. So A is not really wrong, but it's not really highlighting any of the ethical values that I know that I need to do. B, to ensure the client has a short stay at the healthcare facility. That's not a value at all. So I'm not even going to consider that. To become a member of the institutional ethics committee. Absolutely not. Never pick an answer that shows you're doing something for your own self. Okay. It's never for your own self. So no. To protect the rights of the client. All right. I know that autonomy says the patient has a right to self-determination. And I know my primary responsibility is to the patient. So D, not only it puts the focus on the client, which is where it should be, but it puts the focus on their autonomy. So why am I advocating for a client? The primary reason we're advocating for a client is to protect their autonomy. Now, it's also protect quality of care for them. We want to promote quality of care, but we can do lots of things without advocating that is quality of care. Like I can just do my job and it's quality of care, whereas the act of advocating for them is protect their rights. The nurse is expected to witness the informed consent of a client preparing for surgery. Which of the following indicate that the nurse should not sign the consent form? Select all that apply. Now, consent is an autonomy principle, right? I'm giving consent. I'm saying, yes, you're allowed to do this to me. I'm the right of self-determination. I have to consent before you can do something to me. The word informed is saying that it is true consent, because if it's uninformed consent, then it's not true consent. You can say, well, yeah, I let you do that to me, but I didn't know you were going to give me anesthesia. I didn't know you were going to cut my arm off. You just said you were going to fix my problem. You didn't say you were going to fix it by cutting my arm off. See, if it's not informed consent, then it's not consent. So, informed consent means the patient is really told everything, they understand it, and they agree to it without coercion. That's informed consent. And that it falls under the umbrella of autonomy. The client has received all the information required to make a decision. That sounds like informed consent to me. The client still has some doubts about the surgery to be performed. They still have doubts. I don't want them to sign the consent form. The client describes the procedure to which he or she is consenting. Well, that would show that they know what's going on. So, yes, the client's family persuaded the client to sign the consent. Well, that's coercion. I don't like that. The client is oriented. Yes, I want them to know. I mean, if they're oriented, that means they know where they are, what's going on, right? They're not confused. I don't want them to be confused. I want them to be oriented. That's good. The client is very sleepy. That's not a good idea to be doing informed consent when they're sleepy, because I don't know if they really heard everything. That's sort of questionable. Okay, so let's reread the question. The nurse is expected to witness the informed consent of a client preparing for surgery. Which of the following indicate that the nurse should not sign the consent form? Now, what this is saying is that even if the patient signed it, y'all, and they go, okay, I signed it. Now I come in and witness their signature. I am witnessing the fact that they signed it on what as they were informed. So before I witness the signature, before I sign it, I always say, did you have all your questions answered? Do you know what's going on? Do you feel like you're informed? Yes, I do. They talked to you about the problems and the risks and the benefits. Yes, they did. All right, fine. I'll sign it. Just because they signed it, if it's not witnessed, y'all, it's not good. I have to sign it before it's good as an informed consent. So when it says the nurse should not sign it, that's saying I might walk in the room and they've signed it, but I'm not signing it. If any of these things are going on, I'm not signing it. If they still have doubts about the surgery, that's B. I'm not signing it if they still have doubts about the surgery. I'm not signing it if the family persuaded the client to sign the consent. And I'm not signing it if the patient or the client is sleepy. Okay, so that's why it says the nurse should not sign the consent form. So don't overthink it. Don't go, well, the nurse doesn't have to sign the consent. Yeah, we do. We're witnessing it. We're witnessing that they have informed consent. We're not the ones that give them all the information, but we're witness that they are informed. Okay. According to the American Nurse Association Code of Ethics, what should the nurse do to participate in the advancement of the profession? Oh, that's one of those big idea questions. So that's coming from like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, one of those, right? Where we're obligated to be participate in advancement of the profession. Determine appropriate delegation of the nursing tasks. Okay, that's a role. That's a role question. That's not about advancing the profession. Promote and advocate for the rights of the colleagues. Of colleagues? No. That's its rights of the clients, not rights of colleagues. No. Contribute to practice, education, administration, and knowledge development. Well, that's what we're supposed to do. That is what we're supposed to do to promote the profession. Collaborate with other healthcare professionals in the community. Well, we do that, but we do that for the purpose of promoting good care, not to promote the advancement of the profession. So C is what we do to promote advancement of the profession. The nurse observes that another nurse is showing prejudice while providing care to clients from a lower socioeconomic status. How should the nurse deal with the situation? Report the incident to another nurse about the prejudiced nature of the care. Report the incident to the nurse administrator, raise the issue to public scrutiny, or warn the colleague and take legal action. So you might say to yourself, well, how am I supposed to know the answer to this? All right, there is a way to know the answer to this. When they tell you that a colleague or another person that you work with, another nurse, colleague, anybody, could be the person cleaning the room. Doesn't matter, but it's a colleague, it's not a patient. And they tell you they're doing something inappropriate. First, you say, is it illegal what they're doing? Is what they're doing illegal? And if it is illegal, you have to report them, not to the police. You report them up the chain of command within the hospital. So you don't call 911. You report them up the chain. And I don't know how many of you have kept up with that Lucy Letby nurse in the UK who killed those babies. Oh, that's horrifying. If you haven't heard about the Lucy Letby case, yeah, you should look into that. Anyway, it's horrifying what she did. But her colleagues suspected that she was killing babies, and they reported it up the chain of command, and the chain of command did nothing, y'all. So those colleagues are not responsible because they reported it up the chain of command. But there are people saying, how come nobody ever called 911? Like, why didn't any of those nurses who suspected what she was doing, or the doctors who suspected what she was doing, why didn't they ever call the police? And I think one of them finally did. I think that's actually how they caught her. I think one of those colleagues finally called the police, but that's not going to be the right answer on the NCLEX. Okay. On the NCLEX, they're going to want you to follow the chain of command. So, is what they're doing illegal? In the United States, showing prejudice is discrimination, which is considered illegal to show discrimination. Now, it's not necessarily illegal to show discrimination to a colleague or to a friend. But when you're in authority over someone, you have authority over them, and you show prejudice against them or you discriminate against them, that's considered illegal. And that's because you're in a place of authority. And nurses are in places of authority over their patients. Whether you like it or not, we are. We control the meds, we control the telephone, we control the TV. Like, we control all this stuff, right? We control visitors. I mean, think COVID. During COVID, I was allowed to decide if the patient could have a family member visit. Like, I had a lot of power during COVID. Now, some people are like, I wasn't allowed to do that. Well, the hospital I worked, I was. No, we hardly ever did. Nobody hardly ever asked. But, if the patient was dying or something, I could say, yes, let them in. Let the family come in. And I did. So we have a lot of power. So when we discriminate or show prejudice against those that we have power over, that's illegal. So, is this illegal? Yes. Then that means we have to report them, not to the police. We have to go up the channel. So where is that? Report the incident to another nurse. Well, that's not going up the channel. That's to a colleague. Or chain of command. I'm sorry, chain of command. That's not going up the chain of command. Report the incident to the nurse administrator. Yes, that's going up the chain of command. Raise the issue to public scrutiny. That's not going up the chain of command. Warn the colleague and take legal action. That's not going up the chain of command. So the correct answer is report the incident to a nurse administrator. During an assessment, the nurse learns that the client does not have an advance directive. Why does the nurse document this finding in the medical record? So why do we document that they do not have an advance directive? So I don't know the right answer to this right off the bat. Like, I don't read this and go, oh, I know why. I don't know why. But it's a why question. And why questions for something like this, it's not like why does MRSA resistant to penicillin? Okay, that's not what it's saying. That's a pathophysiology question. This is a big idea question. This is the theoretical question, right? Why do we chart something? Okay, so theoretically, why do we chart something? Well, let's figure this out. The nurse is required to document the finding as per the Bill of Rights. I mean, the Bill of Rights tends to be policy hospital by hospital. Each hospital has a patient Bill of Rights. Is there a national patient Bill of Rights? There might be with the National Hospital Association. I'm not sure. But even so, that's not why I do it. That wouldn't be why I do it. The client cannot be treated unless he or she has an advance directive. I know that's false. The nurse must protect the client's right to make decisions affecting health and welfare. Well, I know C is a value that we have. So even though I don't know if that's why we chart about advance directives do document their preferences. That's what advance directives are. I want to be resuscitated. I don't want to be resuscitated. I want to be on the ventilator. I don't want to be on the ventilator, right? That's them making their own decisions. So saying that I must protect the client's right, that's just a good NCLEX. That's a good NCLEX answer because that's exactly what I do, or I'm supposed to do. The client cannot avail of insurance facilities in the absence of an advance directive. Well, I know that's false. So B and D are false. B and D are false. A might be true, but I know C is true because I understand that one of the primary things nurses do is make sure our patients maintain their rights of autonomy and privacy and veracity and fidelity, right? And beneficence and non-maleficence. Like, I want to make sure that patients are treated the way they're supposed to be treated. So C is the best answer that I can see there, even though I'm not sure if A is true. I know C is true. And you might say, well, nobody taught me that's why I have to chart that. Nobody taught me that. And I say, nobody taught me that either. This is how you use common sense to answer a question. You say, well, I know that what's valued in US nursing is protecting patient rights. And I know advanced directives are documents that say what I want to do. And so charting that, it seems like, would be helping to protect their rights. So I'm not telling you every question that makes absolute perfect sense. Don't be putting a comment, Sharon. Well, how does that protect their rights? I don't know. Y'all, I don't know. I'm just telling you how to figure out the right answer. That's all I'm telling you. I didn't write that question. Maybe Chat GPT wrote that question. Okay. Well, I hope this helped you. I hope you have a great rest of your day. And I will see you later. Bye.